Hello, all you kings, queens, and those in between. Paresh Maharaj here, host of the Busted Lions podcast, and for right now, your host of this side quest, in which I get to spread the good word of the Healing Church and talk about a game I never thought I'd fall in love with, FromSoftware's Bloodborne. Some of you probably don't know the name FromSoftware off the top of your head, but I'm sure you've heard the name Dark Souls before. Yep, it's those guys. That studio infamous for making hard games that force you to get good. And I understand why someone wouldn't see the appeal in a game like that, because after all, where's the fun in dying over and over and over again? Hell, I used to be one of those people. My first foray into the Soulsborne genre was Dark Souls 2, which apparently is a terrible starting point, but you live and learn. And I gave up on Dark Souls 2 after 2 play sessions. I don't want to say 2 playthroughs because I'm never going to reach the end of that game. The only reason I even picked up Bloodborne was because a close friend of mine recommended it and said that he could help me through it via co-op. And fast forward to the present day, and even he, that friend, would admit that I'm officially better at this game than he is now. So, what changed? Well, I found out what people mean by getting good. And what it means is, you learn the game the way it's meant to be learned. You try out different weapons. You practice the dodge and parry timings, and of course, die a lot. But if I had to sum up in one word the thing that made the game click with me, it's hitboxes. The hitboxes in Bloodborne are so polished that there are some attacks that you could literally walk around and step out of the way of. There's even a video on YouTube where someone manages to beat a boss without using a single dodge roll, just walking around her attacks. It's very impressive. And honestly, I think that's a big reason why people struggle with not just Bloodborne, but Souls games in general. At first, they assume that Bloodborne's hitboxes are going to operate the same way that a typical game's hitbox works, where you know what I'm talking about, where as long as you're anywhere within 2 inches of an attack, that attack will connect. Looking at you, Monster Hunter World. But, yeah, that's not the case in Bloodborne, and once you figure that out, you feel like you can take on anything. B for New Game Plus ups the enemy's health and damage and humbles you. But nonetheless, once you have your fundamentals down, you could still adapt to the higher difficulties. All this, and I haven't even gotten to the combat and level design yet. And as much as I'd love to take all day and give both those topics the fleshing out that they deserve, I'm on a bit of a time limit here. Matt said I only have no longer than 20 minutes, so I think I'll just kill 2 crows with 1 pebble and praise both by highlighting Bloodborne's other biggest strength, its replayability. Not only does Bloodborne boast one of the most diverse weapon selections in all of gaming, but there are different ways to experience the world. And let me just take those things one at a time. When I say diverse weapon selection, I'm talking that you could go with one of the starter weapons, the saw cleaver, which is probably the best weapon in the game. Never mind. It is the best weapon in the game, because Bloodborne is one of the few games where the weapon featured on the game cover actually is the best weapon in the game. There's also the katana-like Chikage, where you actually infuse it with your own blood to up the damage at the cost of your own health. There's the Kirkhammer, which is a sword that becomes a hammer. Trust me, it makes sense when you see it. My personal favorite, though, is the Rakio. It's a dagger and a sword that can combine just to form one dagger sword, kind of like Darth Maul style. It's amazing. And as far as experiencing the world goes in different ways, I have to give a specific example, because while there are also areas that you could skip entirely without penalty and still beat the game, small decisions as simple as choosing to go the opposite way through an area yields different dialogue options, different perspectives, even different details that you wouldn't think that making a small decision like that would yield. Like, for example, there's this area in the game called Old Yharnam, where when you first go through it, you're greeted by this dude named Jura, who's up on a rooftop, who tells you to turn back and leave the beasts in Old Yharnam alone. And, of course, in order to progress through the game, you have to ignore him, which causes him to start shooting at you with a Gatling gun. But assuming you don't kill him and go through the area, you can actually backtrack through the area by entering through the door after beating the boss Dark Beast Parl. And going through the level backwards means that he doesn't recognize you if you decide to go meet him again. And because of that, he's able to just walk right up to you and just talk to you and explain to you his entire life's philosophy, which is that the beasts in Old Yharnam aren't beasts, they're just people who have been corrupted against their will and just pose no harm to the people up on the surface. I mean, of course, you could still decide to kill him then, or you could choose to spare him. And even if you decide to spare him, he makes you swear not to attack any of the beasts that occupies Old Yharnam in front of him, because if you do, he'll just turn his Gatling gun on you again, and he'll stay that way until you kill him. All that just from walking through a level backwards. And that's the thing that I love about Bloodborne that keeps me coming back to it, is you get choices. I start every playthrough by asking myself, what do I feel like doing this time? Do I want to kill every boss? Do I want to kill every enemy in an area? Do I make it so that the only enemies I kill are the mandatory bosses? Do I activate the side quest with the NPC who eats people? Or do I meet Eileen the Crow again? You get so many choices, and that's just the main game. The DLC is even more difficult than the core game, but it's also the best type of DLC. It's the type of DLC that expands on the already established story and already established lore in Bloodborne and brings it to a nice little satisfying conclusion. And that's all in all what keeps me coming back to it. If after everything I've said you're still not convinced to pick it up, then maybe you could draw inspiration from someone like how I did. And to that end, I highly recommend the streamer Jesus Here's Toast. He also has a YouTube channel where he uploads his streams, and to date he has done playthroughs with every weapon, speed runs at GDQ, and he even has a lore run where he breaks down the story as he plays. And yes, no matter what anyone tells you, Bloodborne has a story. It's just the type of story that you actually have to play the game, you have to explore, you have to read item descriptions, you have to play the game to figure out the story and piece it together. And that's another thing that adds to Bloodborne's replayability. Every playthrough, you're basically guaranteed to run into a new sliver of lore or story that you'd never noticed before. Now, if I have convinced you to pick this game up and to make this your first prance through Yharnam, first off, you could tell me on Twitter at Noblekind92 for my personal, or at BustedLimes for my podcast. And second off, pick the saw cleaver as your starter weapon. Just do it. And thirdly, let the good blood guide your way, and happy gaming.